Alright, so now that we've listed all the different ideas to add into our project, from player control to basic gameplay, as well as additional sound and effects and mechanics, let's take a look at how we're going to get all of those things done through our project timeline. So with our timeline, we just want to think about how long we want to spend building our project, as well as the different things that we're going to do during those different days or weeks. So you can see here I've listed different dates that I plan to get some of these goals accomplished by, and some of them are pretty broad versus very specific depending on how much work I'm able to accomplish that week. And I've stretched it all the way out through 7 weeks to think about how I'm going to build this project to completion. In addition, if you find that you probably don't have enough time to build your project over these different weeks, I highly recommend adding different bonuses into the backlog, some nice features to have. That might not be necessary, but if you do end up having the time to complete them, they could be really nice things to add into your game. So with that, now it's your turn. You're going to go in and fill your project timeline with the description of the tasks that you're going to complete, as well as the due dates for each of those tasks. Try to think through your project creation as much as possible over these next few weeks, and if there are additional features that you want to add in, make sure to add them into the backlog. So now it's your turn. Now, we've outlined our ideas through our project concept. We've given ourselves a timeline of what we're trying to accomplish. Now, we're going to put our ideas down on paper through a sketch. Now, the sketch will help us really visualize and imagine what our MVP, our minimum viable product of our game, will look like. This is just a way to help imagine all the different things that are happening. So, for example, I have that background scrolling that I wanted to do. I have those animals that are running by, like moose and deer. I have these health life ups, power ups that I can add in. I have rocks that come down as well. And then I have these foxes that spawn. And then I have the player that can move. Now, these are designed to just be very simple ideas. We're not trying to get very in depth. We're just trying to visualize and understand what we're trying to build for a lot of our basic mechanics, especially. A really helpful thing with this sketch is if you put it in front of another person to review and take a look at, and then you put your game in front of them, it should line up pretty nicely with what they expect is trying to happen in your game. So, to help understand what we're trying to accomplish, I'll create my own simple little sketch. Remember, it's not supposed to be very complex or complicated, just supposed to show the basic ideas of what we're trying to do. So if I select one of these shapes, so I'll use this circle, and the circle will be my player. So we have the player, and I want to be able to move my player in different directions. So these arrows just help to understand that my player is going to be moving around. Let's see if I get a different shape. So I'll use these rectangles. So one rectangle, and we'll actually fill this in with one color. So this could be something like our moose. I'll make this a bright red. If we make another rectangle, this one might be one of the other deer. And then if I make another, in this case I'll make this a rounded rectangle because it's not necessarily an animal, but this would be our rock. So now I know that all of these rectangles are all different enemies, and then we can even use arrows to help show that they're all going to be moving down. And then another thing that we can add, we'll add another rectangle. And we'll make this one a bright yellow. In fact, we'll add in a different arrow. To show that this is actually something that will chase after our player. And then I can use something like this cool looking arrow and I can rotate it around. So this will show that our screen is supposed to scroll. Maybe I'll even add some text just to make it a bit more clear. So background scrolls. And then one other thing that I need to add is the heart icons. And we'll move it in a different place so that way we know. And so these hearts restore player life. Added some more text boxes, different enemy types, moose, deer, rocks, foxes. And so this way it just kind of helps to convey all of the different things that I'm trying to accomplish. Definitely clean yours up a little bit more than mine, but you can feel free to do this on a drawing program, or you can just use pen and paper, pencil and paper. You're just trying to get down the general idea of what you're trying to accomplish. Definitely make it detailed to the point where you can understand how the game works and the basic functionality and how it looks, but don't go too overboard with it. You don't have to draw, like in my case, like a deer head or something like that, or a fox head or something. Just use the different shapes to outline all the different objects that you could potentially use to understand what you're trying to create. With that, try making your own MVP sketch so that way you can understand and visualize your game. Use different shapes to understand what things are enemies or obstacles, power-ups, your player. Use arrows so you can see all the different movement that might be happening. Anything that you might need to understand the mechanics and behavior of your game, outline it in your sketch. Now it's your turn.
Okay. So essentially, okay. If it comes to primitive sketching like that, where I'm just using shapes and stuff like that, like super simple, that I can do. No problem. All right, let's look at the recap, and I'll begin the lab.
Awesome. So we've made some great progress on our project. We've completed our concept. We've mapped all of the different things we're trying to accomplish to our timeline. And we've made a sketch to help visualize all of the things that we want to do in our game. And while that doesn't necessarily seem like a lot, in fact, this will be incredibly helpful to make sure that our game is as good as it can be with the amount of time available. So that way, as we're building our project, we don't end up going off in a direction that will take us away from finishing our project with the amount of time that we have. And we understand all the things that we actually want to add into our game to make it look awesome. So we've learned a variety of different things, new concepts and skills. We've learned about our personal project that we're going to create over the next few weeks. We learned about design documents to help us think about these personal projects. We've learned about project timelines to break down all of the work that we have to do inside of milestones that have very clear objectives of what we're trying to accomplish by a certain time. And we've learned about minimum viable products for our games so that way we can do the best that we can with the amount of time that we have. So with that, keep thinking about your project so that we can build it in our next lab.
Okay. Nice. All right. In thinking about this, uh, and what the instructor, wow, the thing about everything's so loud. And what the instructor was, is telling us, um, this reminds me of something useful that I watched in a game journalist slash indie developer by the name of Yahtzee Croshaw. He has a series known as the Yahtzee's Dev Diary, in which he introduced me to, and which I am now obsessed with, which is pretty much what this exercise is trying to have us do, which is outline our 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 um, our. I had it in my head, then dropped it. Our core game loop. He explains. He talks about the core game loop and how important that is. And I think um, I want to watch that video to try to get back into the proper thing of trying to figure out how to do just that. But I am trying to get to the episode in which he speaks of the core game loop. Give me a second. I know because he brings it up. Okay, one second. I'm sorry to be doing this. Like I said, this is just an afterthought, but I promise you it's important enough for me to do this. I. Uh, Blerg, where are you? There we go. Okay, here I think this is what I'm looking for. Hopefully this is it. In which like this is the thing that should be focused on, and this is about where my mind is, and I think it would be useful, especially for this portion of the thing. So I just want you to show you guys what he says about development when it especially comes to building your core game loop. It's very important, and yeah, I think it's worth getting a refresher, especially at this point, in thinking about all these things for my game. So let's take a listen. Just turn it off for me. Can you turn it off for me? Sorry, my food. Thank you, mother. Sorry, again, the stove. Um, so let's take a look and see what he says about the core game loop and how important it is and how this exercise is going to get us to perfecting ours. So here we go.
And attempted to create a couple of games, but have a nasty habit of making my projects too big. How do you personally limit your scope to prevent this from happening?
I'm glad you asked me this, Superstino. I've touched upon it briefly before, but I want to go into detail. I have this mad idea that some people might take advice from me, and if there's only one piece of advice I'd like taken away from this entire series, it's this. Focus on the primary gameplay loop. The primary gameplay loop, as I understand it, refers to what you want the player to be trying to achieve on a second-by-second basis. So in something like Doom, this would be move around, shoot monsters. Or in Pac-Man, it's eat pills, avoid ghosts. Most games will also have a secondary loop, which is what you're trying to achieve from minute to minute, and a tertiary loop for hour to hour, roughly speaking. So the secondary loop of Pac-Man would be eating every pill in the level. The tertiary loop would be beating enough levels to get a high score. And that's as deep as Pac-Man gets. But other games have even more loops. You can have as many layers as you like, but ultimately they all come down to the constant repetition of a primary loop. It needn't necessarily be seconds long either. If you're making something more cerebral, business sim, turn-based strategy, something menu-driven, You can expect a higher attention span from the target audience, and your primary loop can spread out a bit. But even then, it's perfectly possible to make the mere act of navigating a menu and pressing buttons fun and engaging. Look at Persona 5 for a crash course in that. But I digress. Your task as a game designer is to make sure that the primary loop is fun and or engaging. In my current project, BRTV, the primary loop basically boils down to watching other people have fun, so I'm going to try to add enough animation and sound and humour to make that fun in itself. Now, I know what you're thinking. Duh, ya